Good evening to all. Shall we start the program now? Um, the Department of Economics of St. Joseph's College, Devagiri is organizing a series of talks on different topics related with Indian economy. St. Joseph's College, Devagiri is a premier higher education institution ranked as first A++ Arts and Science College in the country with a CGPA of 3.76 out of 4. College was established by CMI congregation in the year 1956. For the last 66 years, true to its motto, for God and country, the institution works with commitment to create a just and humane society, upholding national integration and religious harmony, with special emphasis on the enrichment of the poor and marginalized. Because of its contribution in academic, cultural, and social realms, NAC has accredited the college with a grade in 2004, and the institution was re-accredited with CGPA of 3.76 on a 4-point scale as the first A++ Arts and Science College in the country. Department of Economics started functioning from the very inception of the college itself. With students at undergraduate, postgraduate, and research level, the department has been producing excellent results. It has produced more than 75 winners in UGC JRF NET examinations and 28 rank holders in university examinations. India has emerged as the fastest growing major economy in the world. A comprehensive, sustained, and long-term strategy for development is widely appreciated by many. Discussions are going on in different parts of the world about these growth prospects. At this juncture, the Department of Economics is organizing a webinar series on recent trends in Indian economy. The series will have sessions on monthly basis by renowned academic researchers, industrialists, and policymakers on major fields of economics. This series of talks aims to bring academicians, industrialists, and policymakers in a common platform to discuss, and formulate strategies which enable society to cope up with change in the economy, expanding the knowledge base of the general public on various aspects of the Indian economy, and to facilitate young researchers to expand their capacity by providing them with an opportunity for cross-country and interdisciplinary learning and knowledge sharing. To achieve these goals, we will have discussions on various topics related with Indian economy in these days. Today, we have an eminent scholar to discuss on the demographic trends in India. The resource person of the day is Dr. K.S. James, the Director and Senior Professor, International Institute for Population Science, Mumbai. He secured his postdoctoral from Harvard University, doctorate in demography from JNU, and MPhil from International Institute for Population Sciences, Mumbai. He has published more than 100 publications as books, articles, and working papers. He is a visiting fellow in many reputed institutions like Population Research Center, School of Spatial Sciences, University of Groningen, Center for Research on Aging, University of Southampton, International Institute for Applied System Analysis, Luxembourg, French National Institute of Demographic Studies, Paris, France, ICSSR visiting fellowship to London School of Economics. He contributed a lot to the society as the head of various institutions like International Institute for Population Sciences, Mumbai, Professor in Population, Center for the Study of Regional Development, JNU, Director, ISAC, Bangalore, Professor and Head, Population Research Center, ISAC, Deputy Director, Population Research Center, University of Kerala, Reader, Center for Economic and Social Studies, Hyderabad. St. Joseph's College is proud to have such a resourceful person to deliver the talk today. Respected sir, we all are eagerly waiting for hearing from you. On behalf of all those who are waiting for you on online, and on behalf of St. Joseph's College, Devagiri, I wholeheartedly welcome you to this seminar. Welcome you, sir. We have participants from different parts of the country. I welcome you all to this webinar, and I hope that this session and the coming sessions will be useful for you all. Wishing you all some resourceful time. I request Dr.
You're muted now, suddenly.
Okay. Okay, so we have participants from different parts of the country. I welcome you all to this webinar, and I hope that this session will be useful for you all. Wishing you all some fruitful or resourceful time here in this evening. And I request Dr. K.S. James, sir, the Director and Senior Professor, International Institute for Population Sciences, Mumbai, to deliver the talk on demographic trends in India with special reference to Kerala. Sir, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Biju, for such a generous introduction. So I'm not very sure whether all these points you have raised is valid for as far as I'm concerned. But thank you so much. And let me at the outset thank Father Biju, Dr. Anne-Marie, as well as the head of the department, Dr. Shibi, for inviting me to deliver this talk today. I'm indeed grateful to all of you. And I know St. Joseph College for a long time. It has been one of the prestigious colleges in India, sorry, in the Kerala, in either it's in economics or many other disciplines. You have produced several wonderful students who are serving in different parts of the Kerala as well as in India. That I'm really proud that the college is also organizing this series of lectures on understanding Indian economy in a larger perspective. So let me just share my slides and so I hope it is visible now.
No, not now, sir. It's not.
Not it. Sorry, let me just see what is the issue. What about it now?
No, sir.
Is it visible?
No, sir, it's not visible.
Oh. Which one should I choose? Because when I click, I get your entire screen, your window, and a tab.
I think,
But it choose the entire screen, no?
yeah.
That is what I have chosen.
Yes, now it is coming.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about this technical glitch. Yeah, I'm going to speak about something on demographic changes both in India and Kerala that has been what has been suggested, which perhaps is not only because of the suggestion, because that is also my favorite topic. So we really need to understand because demographic changes has very significant impact on the economy, society, and even you can say at the family and at the individual level. So it's also important to understand if you really want to understand the economic changes, undoubtedly you need to also understand the changes in demographic patterns and its implications so that why such changes can happen and what will be its future trajectory will also be mostly understood. So I will today will speak about these 3 or 4 elements. One is because being a demographer as well as being a part of too much of numbers, because demographers also deal with a lot of numbers and analysis. So it's also important to really understand the science behind these numbers, because perhaps what does it imply in terms of in the economic impact, or whether it is a social impact, or whether it is other impact. It's very important to understand what is science behind these numbers. So I will perhaps, to some extent initially, I will look at these numbers and then will also tell you what does it imply in terms of demographic changes. And definitely I will also come to the demographic changes as well as an Indian perspective, although this first and second will go hand in hand. And it's important that you understand the science as well as you understand the changes. Thereafter, I will also look at how does these demographic changes occur. I think that's very important. In case you know how does it occur, you'll also able to understand what are its implications and how does it going to portray in the future. So we'll also speak about India as well as in Kerala to some extent, but more generally, not very in depth in the case of Kerala. But then finally, also look at some of the implications in demographic change, which many of you are aware, some of the economic implications, and also perhaps some of the other implications. But that also not in very great detail, but I will just make some passing remarks in all these aspects. So let me just first tell you the demographic changes of population growth. We can really, because demographic changes is a larger term, perhaps actually once you narrow it down, you can always tell what is really happening to the population growth. This is what is really happening in the history, not only in terms of the economic changes, but if you really see the population changes or demographic changes, you would see something remarkable happening over the last few centuries, or maybe for India for the last half a century or so. So what does it really happens? If you really look at the history, you can always, for thousands and hundreds and thousands of years, the population growth has never been an issue. It was always been near to zero. It was never exceeded even 0.5% hardly. So always the birth rate and death rate was relatively high, but at the same time, it is because it was relatively high, your population growth was always been near to zero. And you will also know that life expectancy was very, very low. It was around 20 to 40, maximum 40 was very hardly touched in any parts of the society. So pandemics, famine, because pandemics, etc., we hear now in this century. Otherwise, for the past centuries, famine, pandemics, etc., was almost part of their life. And if you really look at, because this is typically taught in the economic students by Malthus theory, which tells you on the essays on the principles of population, which specifically tells you what kind of really happening, all the fluctuations happening during the early period, because this is a vicious circle according to him, the Malthus, because the economic improvement happens, but at the same time, there will be too much of scarcity also will happen, because that will lead to population growth, and then scarcity happens. So it comes up and down in birth rate and death rate always happens because of the relationship between resources and the population. That is what he tells. So this is a story, if you put it in a nutshell in the world, for still about 1800, you can never in the world, the population crossed more than 1 billion. So that was the case. It was hardly 1 billion was ever reached. So from 1800 onwards, you really see a very rapid increase in the population, but first in the Western countries, followed by many developing countries, including India, which was in 20th century. And because the other one was in 19th century, but it was primarily in the 19th century, because it was reached 1 billion only in 1820 or so. So thereafter, the pace has substantially increased. Then you know that currently, the November 15th, we celebrated the 8 billion population. So in the world now, it is 8 billion. And we expect that the population will reach something around 10 billion for the next maybe 30 to 40 years or 40 to 50 years, and then stabilize. That is what the current expectation is, that because there is a demographic changes happening everywhere. Because of that, these changes will also. So that is about the world. But if you really look at India, you would see these kinds of changes, because this is some part of it are the past and some part of it, the graph is telling about the future. So what does it tells? If you say what will happen to India's population, in general, we can say India's population will be something around 1.65 billion in around 2060. And that would be sort of the peak of the population growth in India. So currently, you know that we have something around 1.4 billion population, 1.38 in 2020. So currently it is expected to be around 1.4 billion. So by 2060, we will almost reach the peak of the population, that is 1.6 billion, that is 1,651 million, or 165 crores, if you really say in terms of the crores. So 165 crores is the expected. Now currently it's 140 crores. So thereafter, it will not increase, it will only start declining. That is what, if you really look at the overall population growth. But you know that the population growth are primarily because of the fertility transition, that is the birth rate. The birth rate is defined, there are several measures of birth rate, but we always use the total fertility rate, which is also depicted in the red line, which is passing through that population. If you really look at in 2020, you will see that the population, the fertility rate, the birth rate, which is called total fertility rate, which is 2.1. The 2.1 means it is actually generally means that two parents are replacing two children. So it means in the long run, the population growth rate will be 0. That is what the relevance of 2.2 is the two parents replacing the children, two children. 0.1 we always say, because whatever be the society, even if the most advanced societies, there will be some element of mortality in it. So 0.1 we say the child mortality, even children, Japan, you can say one of the best, the healthcare system, even there will be an infant mortality rate of something around 4 or 3 or 2. You cannot really bring it down to 0. It is not possible. So naturally, there will be some mortality element always. That is why 0.1 is accounted. So 2.1 is something which we assume that if you really want to sustain a population almost the same level, you would have to have 2 children or 2.1 children per couple. So we have 2.1. You can see that will reduce. 1.7 is what 2.6, 60 onwards we assume. But 1.7 is an assumption. And when we fix, for the projection, we fixed 1.7 because we assume that it will not go down beyond 1.7. We will come back to that, whether it will go down or not go down. But the projection assumes 1.7. That is why the population growth of 165 or 1, the course, etc., is based on the assumption that it will not go down much below 1.7. So this is, we can say, is India's demographic changes, which is really we have seen. We also see that, it is not only the overall India, but even most states in the country are sort of a below replacement level. Replacement, as I told you, it is 2 children per the couple. So that is the replacement. So we see that many states are at the replacement level. And not only that, every state is experiencing a very rapid transition. Even the states which has been previously supposed to be very high birth rate states like UP or Bihar, etc., is also experiencing a very rapid transition. So all of you know that the demographic patterns are now viewed more optimistically than a few decades back now, because everyone expects that India is on the right path in the demographic changes. But we also need to understand that any demographic changes will have serious implications at various fronts, which we will come back in my later part of the talk. So to show you what is really happening, because as I told you, we assume that 1.7 will be the lowest rate which you assume, because this is based on the traditional demographic transition theory. I don't know whether you learn demographic transition theory. If you learn the theory, which tells you that there will be a transition from high birth rate and high death rate to a low birth rate and low death rate. But where is the transition going to stop? It will stop at a replacement level. That is around 2. Around 2 means it can be 1.8 and it can be 2 or it can be 2.2. It is around that range. But the theory doesn't assume that it will go far below that. Because once you go far below that, it has a very serious other implications. As I told you, even the sustainability of the population can even be questioned. So that is why, but if you really look at India now, you see this is the latest figures which is available for 2020, which is official data sets, which is available from the government of India. you will see that there are many states in the country, it is far below 2, 1.4 in Delhi, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal. In Kerala, it is 1.5. And there are other states, and there are other exceptions like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, etc., which is, but there are very few states now above 2.1, which is above replacement level fertility. You can see countable number of states now, 6 states are, but Chhattisgarh is already 2.2, which in 2022, by that time, now they might have already reached replacement level. Jharkhand, Rajasthan is also closer to that. Exceptions are perhaps the Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which is also now fast changing. If you really look at the data for the last 5 years or 10 years, we also see very rapid changes which is happening in these states. So naturally, we would expect all these states within a decade. Bihar may be the lagging because maybe it may take a decade or more, but other states definitely within this decade itself might reach a replacement level fertility. So overall, India is 2 now. So overall, when these states are also coming into the replacement level, you will imagine that our all India level, it will go much below 2, and states which are already much below 2, like 1.4, etc., we don't know how far they will go below. So we cannot predict now, but we will assume. I will come back to that part of the things later. So this is sort of a numbers what we really see in India. So what is the demographic changes happening both in India or both in Kerala? You would see that Kerala was much earlier, but Kerala has also a very low fertility now, which is something around 1.5 children per couple. The question is that what triggered this transition, demographic transition? Why actually such a rapid sweeping changes which has happened in this country, which in a very short span of time, we can perhaps say, because, if you really look at the Western countries or Japan, sorry, not Japan, but the France or Germany or other countries, France was almost the beginner of the fertility transition or demographic transition, which was happened in around 1800. They took almost 120 to 150 years to complete the transition. But in India, you see, it started in 60s or late 60s and 70s. And by 2020, maybe you can say 40 or 60 years, 50 to 60 years, we have almost quickly reached a transition. But people say it is delayed because when compared to Western countries, it is delayed. But we would also need to see why this transition is taking place. Now, what is this conventional wisdom is telling? As we are told, I think most of you might have been studying this theory, the demographic transition theory, which gives you some idea why should demographic changes take place, whether it is mortality changes, whether it is fertility changes, whether it is other transition, why it is taking place. So it assumed certain things. It assumed that there should be an improvement in the living standards of the people. There should be socioeconomic changes, whether should be a modernization, it should be an urbanization which is happening, which are all accompanied for a demographic changes. So changes happens because of certain preconditions. The preconditions are a little bit of modernization in terms of living standards improvement and economic changes in society, etc. And many people might say that even economic factors may not be that important, but undoubtedly, everyone agrees to one fact, that is, a female education is supposed to be critical. In case you wanted to have a reduction in the birth rate, naturally, the education level of the female has to go up drastically. This is the experience of many countries. You can look, if you look at the theory of demographic transition, which was primarily based on the experience of the Western countries, because at that time when the transition theory has been postulated in 1950s, the transition has happened only in the Western countries, not in developing countries. So naturally, the theory was also based on the experience of Western countries. So, but one thing was very clear, overall development is sort of a mandatory to achieve demographic changes. Does it happen in India? I will give you some examples. You really look at this table. So the first one is Kerala. Kerala was, you can see, one of the first states in India to achieve a replacement level or 2 children per couple. It was in 1988, several decades back now. But at that time, Kerala was one of the poorest states in the country. So even Tamil Nadu in 1993, which has a per capita income of much below. But you would see the varied levels of per capita income. So it means that India's demographic changes was not really because a very advanced economic conditions. neither it in Kerala is experienced or even Tamil Nadu or many other states in the country, because even if you really look at Orissa, currently which is known as Odisha, which has one of the poorest states in the country now, but it has already in the replacement level. But other states are not in the So economic factors, which are supposed to be the preconditions for demographic changes, according to the demographic transition theorists, perhaps not considerably true in the case of India's changes. This is really true for many other indicators. So look at the other factors. If you really look at some other factors, because the length of demographic changes, as I told you, in France it took 215 years, England took 225 years, India took only 45 years, China was sort of an artificially created, because it was a forceful implementation of something which cannot be compared with the natural process, but at the same time it is 20 years. So we completed within this period of 45 years. But if you look at the factors, because you can really look at the France, when it reached a replacement level fertility, it was a very low infant mortality rate. In India, it is currently around 28 to 30 as infant mortality rate. Look at the median age at marriage of women. In India, it is still very, very low. It's almost 18.6, you can say 18.5. And that means that a large majority of the women even get married before the legal age at marriage of 18 now. But in France, it was 22, and even China, it was 22. And this was also the case with the life expectancy at birth. It's not significantly different, but it is slightly different, because India has a life expectancy of something around 69 or 70 around right now. The France, it was something around 73. So as I told you, the other factors, if not economics factors, the other factors which are significantly considered was the female literacy level or female education. It's a critical element for any transition process. So look at the illiterate fertility based on the latest data which is available in different states. Different states behaved very varied ways in terms of the transition. For instance, whether it is Tamil Nadu, whether it is Andhra Pradesh, whether it is Himachal Pradesh, whether it is Punjab, the illiterate has much below replacement level fertility, the illiterate women. But there are states with Bihar, Uttarakhand, etc., even illiterate or literate, even literate people will have high fertility there. So even if you really look at fundamentally female education as the major determinants of fertility transition or the demographic changes, which is also not completely true in the case of India, we also see this varied pattern which is really happening on demographic changes. Then the question is that why these changes is happening? If the reasons are not the causes of the transition, if the education or the social transformation is not the major reasons for the demographic changes, then how does it happen? So one, we can say India's fertility transition does not strictly can be considered as a conventional understanding, because conventional understanding means the understanding which we have received from the demographic transition theory. That is what the theory which is available to us. So the factors responsible for this transition are considerably contested in many parts of the country, because in Kerala, which always consider that education is very important, although economic backing was not there for the demographic changes, but female education was very, very high in Kerala at that time. But when it came to Telangana or Tamil Nadu or many other states, even female education was not very high, but still changes has happened. This is happening in many parts of the country. So one way, I think demographic changes is happened through some other reasons. Reasons can be policy level interventions, reasons can be the people's attitude changing, and there are several other reasons, but not perhaps the traditional or conventional reasons which we considered as an important or mandatory conditions for a demographic changes. So because of all these things, we would also see there is a substantial differentials in actually understanding demographic changes in the country, as well as its implications. Because when we tell about the implications of demographic changes, we also anticipate something. But that anticipation may not come true in the case of India because of several reasons, primarily because the reasons for this transition itself has not been the conventional reasons which we have studied which we have learned from the textbook and from the experience of many other countries. So let's then look at some of the implications of demographic changes. I think many implications you might have been heard about it to some extent, but I may not touch all these implications. You know that there is a major implications in terms of in the economy because of demographic changes. The economic changes are always considered as the demographic dividend, is significantly talked in recent times. There's considerable societal changes. We know the migration always talks in Kerala, which also integrally depend on the demographic changes, which I will come back to that. And there is substantial changes happens in the family, which we all notice. We may not be realizing it because we live in the society. We may not realize what is the changes are happening. I will come back to some of these changes which is happening even in the family level, and also even for the individuals. That is, I think all these are very significant changes which is happening because of a transition which is happening in the society. So for the economist, primarily it was an economic implication which is important. Economic implications because is very important because everyone thought, our textbook initially thought that actually rapid population growth, overpopulation is a major detrimental impact on the economic growth. That is what we have been taught in the economic classes. So naturally, the demographic changes we expected to have very favorable impact. So that is expected. We have based on the textbook understanding. So we all thought that has been actually theorized in terms of what we called a demographic dividend. So demographic changes also will lead to something about age structural changes, which is automatic. So that will lead to something called a demographic dividend. So first, let us look at the demographic dividend, and then we will come back to some of the other implications of demographic changes. So the dividend occurs because of the transition process, as we told, because when the demographic changes, which we find is that the age structure changes. That is a major change which happens. You know that what is age structure changes means? It means that actually if you really look at the latest data available, because we have only now data from the 2011 census, because 2021 census has not happened. So even if you look at 2011 census, you will see that the 0 to 6 population is in the negative growth, is declining. So the proportion of population in the younger ages is declining and declining, but the proportion of population at the later ages will be still there because they have been born several decades back. That is what actually the demographic changes which happen. That is what I forgot to mention you earlier, because we tell that replacement level fertility means it is 2. That means that even if it becomes 2, replacement level fertility to population growth becomes 0, it will take 30 to 40 years. That is what we told. Now it is India has reached replacement level fertility of 2, but India's population growth will become 0 after 40 years only. Primarily because those who are going to give birth for the next 40 years is already born in the past. It's not now, not today. So because of that, they were born when there was high birth rate. So naturally, they will come into marriageable age and they will get married and they will have children. So because of that, I think there is a lag between the replacement level fertility and the population growth becoming 0. So this is because of that, but during this transition process, you know that you have a stage 1, which is a typical pyramid that we say the triangular form of age pyramid. The highest people will be in the 0 to 5 age group, and then less in the 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and so exactly a triangle shaped pyramid we will get. But the second stage, which we say when the fertility transition takes place, which we solved, that is currently which is happening in India, we said there is a bulge in the working age population because of the past high birth rate. Now currently we will have more people in the working age group, but lower age at the child population will be less because less and less people are born. So naturally which we tell as demographic dividend period. And there is another period which is the old age dependency increases. So that proportion of older people goes. People say older people increasing may not be very suitable for the economic development, but there is no good evidence for that, because we also see that many countries, there is also something called a second demographic dividend, despite the fact that old age proportion is increasing in these countries. So there is some kinds of debates on this. Some people say it will not be that much good for the economy, but there are other groups which say no, proportion of elderly increasing in itself cannot be bad for the economy. So look at the pyramid. This is the typical pyramid which we say if 2031 in India, if you really look at, you would say bulge in the working age group, that large proportion of people will be in the working age group. That is around 65% of the population will be in the 15 to 59 age group. So if you look at 15 to 64 as the working age group, it will be further increased. So it is, but if you really look at later years, when India became 2051, so you would also see that proportion of people in the older ages will be rapidly increasing. So the proportion by 2051 is expected to be something around 20% of the people in India will be in the older ages. And that for Kerala, it will be something around 25 to 30% at that time. So it will be much higher in Kerala compared to India. So this transition we see invariably in every countries of the world, because every country in this world is undergoing a transition, demographic changes. There's no country is an exception. Whether it is you living in Europe, whether living in Australia, whether you living in Africa, every country is undergoing this transition. Although the pace of the transition is different, some of the levels are also different, but every country is in the transition process. So what does it mean for the demographic dividend? But there is a large optimism that, because of the changes which is happening, because of the demographic bulge in the working age group, there will be a huge demographic potential exist in India. But this optimism, but everyone does not consider it as true, because there's a large concerns also raised on the India's ability to take advantages of this demographic potential. Some people say India may not even achieve this demographic potential, but there are others who say, okay, India has a very large potential and India will achieve this potential. And there is, as I told you, pessimist. There are a large number of pessimists. The question is that why actually there is a pessimism in this? Because everyone thought, as I told you, our textbook always has been taught that demographic changes are good, rapid population growth is bad, rapid population growth is the reasons for poverty. That's all. If you look at the development economics textbook at the older times, or I'm sure even today, it is also filled with the rapid population growth as one of the villains of the lack of economic progress in a country. Then why, when demographic changes occurred, why we had to have these concerns? They said there are two concerns in it. One is that India, despite having a demographic changes, there is a low education of adults, and particularly among the females in this country. So that is one of the reasons they say India may not potentially get the benefits of demographic dividend. And there is also another argument that there is a lack of adequate skills levels in the people, especially in a very competitive labor market now. But if you have to be employed, there should have adequate skill levels, which is not there exist among the people because of the lack of adequate education. So therefore, it is very important to really understand, are these factors really limiting our demographic dividend, or our economic progress is being limited because of these two important factors, because of low education and lack of adequate skill levels? How do you understand it? One possibility is that you can really look at a very deeper analysis. There are many people who does very deeper analysis of it. And other way is to really understand what is really the period we expect on demographic dividend. Because what is demographic dividend period means, means that actually some people, there are a lot of ways of defining it, but the simplest definition we can say that if the less than 15 years of age group population proportion is less than 30%, and over 60 plus population is less than 15%. Because if you increase the 60 plus population, that is also non-working population. If you increase the less than 15 years of population, that is also non-working population. That should not be too high. If they are moderate, then we have a demographic dividend. If you really look at that approach, what do you see? You will see, because this is a clumsy graph, you may not be able to, I will explain it. From the bottom, you can really look at this. The first one is, which we see is the Tamil Nadu. And the second is the reddish one is the Kerala. So it means that Tamil Nadu demographic dividend happens much earlier and it continues now. We expect that it continues something up to 2025. But in Kerala's demographic dividend also started below 2001, but it is expected to be over by 2019. By this definition is that if you really cause 15% 60 plus population and less than 30% less than 15 population. Anyway, Kerala, it is less than 30% only, but our Kerala's population 60 plus will be increasing more than 15% in the coming years. That's why Kerala's demographic dividend is supposed to be stopped. But for India, it is really still continuing. That is that dark graph, which is still continuing and which is expected to go up to around 2035 or 36. But for UP and Bihar, you know that they will still continue to exist. So it will go much beyond. For UP, it is already started expectedly. But for Bihar, it will start only by end of this decade and then it will continue for some more period. So this is about the period of demographic changes. So if you really look at this traditional definition, but this definition need not be true because of varied reasons. Some of it I will come back when we look at other implications, because now people say 60 as a cutoff for defining older ages. It is not really suitable for many countries, because the question is that at age 60, what is your life expectancy? So what is the remaining life expectancy you are expected to live beyond 60? And you know that as the life expectancy increases, now even at age 60, many people survive for another 30 years or even 25 to 30 years. If life expectancy at 60 is something, remaining life expectancy at 60 is something around 30 years, naturally, you're considering that 30 years of your life is economically inactive also may not be very suitable. That's why many countries of the world are enhancing the retirement age. Many countries also world also productively employing the labor force beyond 60. And because of all those things, they were able to avoid, or we can postpone the demographic dividend. Naturally, because of that, it is called a second demographic dividend, because not only that we have a first demographic dividend, we also have a second demographic dividend in terms of getting benefits of the older people by postponing their economic activities beyond the age 60. So that, as already pointed out, but in India, there is a lot of pessimism still persists on really understanding demographic dividend. So naturally, we also need to really look at what is this pessimism and what is its implication. One way to really understand it, as I told you, by looking at very systematically analyzing the data and really understanding whether these demographic changes has been negative or positive. There are a lot of studies. If you really look at for the last 15 years, I just looked at some 7 or 6 studies now. And each of these studies, which is based on very good data sets as well as very good econometric analysis, and all of them invariably has told that India's demographic dividend is positive. So although the perception, as I told you, many people think that India may not achieve a demographic dividend because of the deficiencies which exist in terms of female illiteracy, in terms of the lack of skill levels, etc. But the analysis part, if you really look at the serious analysis, which really doesn't tell you that there is something negative about the demographic dividend. So then what is the another alternative? Another alternative, this Bloom and Cannings has suggested, if you really not able to convince yourself, what you can really look at is that you can also look at what are the facilitating factors of demographic dividend. They have said that there are 5 distinct forces facilitating demographic dividend. So look at these 5 distinct forces and then really see whether these forces has anything to do with our demographic dividend. So what are these forces? These forces, you can say one is they're classified it as 2 groups. One is accounting forces, one is the behavioral forces. You know that accounting means automatically you will get it. Accounting is something which automatically comes to you because when there is an adult swelling of the adult population, there are a large number of adults in a household, you always get a benefits compared to a negative. So invariably you will have some benefits of it. For instance, in a family, if you see that 2 or 3 adults are there, there's 1 or 2 children or 1 or 2 older people. So you will say the large proportion is adults, 3 adults, and less number of children and less number of parents. So naturally, you would get that there will be some activity they will be undertaking in terms of economic, whether it is their own homestead, land which they have, or outside something. So naturally, there will be some economic benefits to the family. So this is also same as age group associated with prime years of saving. Because of the demographic changes, you would also see the saving rate will increase. That is the second ways they say it will. But that is not the important one. The important one is the behavioral changes. Is it behavioral changes are happening in the society, which really leads to a dividend? That was the experience of other countries, whether it is the European countries, whether it is East Asian countries. What is this dividend behavioral changes? One is primarily the women's work participation. Because if you really look at the work participation data, or even that matter, unemployment data, the most of the work participation data tells that men's work participation is sort of universal in nature, although it's not full, but at the same time, because you know that men anyway will be working, whether even it is not based on their potential, they would have got better job, that is different. But at the same time, they will be involved in some or other work. But women who are earlier actually in the traditional ways, when there was no demographic changes, they were mostly spending their time in the household, primarily for childbearing and child rearing. That has changed now because of the demographic changes, because now less births are happening. So naturally, beyond a period, they have adequate years left for contributing to the labor market. Are they contributing? That is the one part of the behavioral changes we expect in many countries. Many countries have undergone that transition. The question is that, has India also undergoing that transition of female labor force participation? The second is the saving rate, because invariably, as we told, when there is less number of children, there is naturally saving rate will increase because the family's expenditure will be less, we expect. So now, because we have more earning members rather than the spending members, so naturally you would expect that saving rate will go up. And the third one, there's an allocation of resources from investing in children to investing in physical capital, which is a typical economic analysis, economic arguments, because that may not be true that much in India, because you know that our investment in even children and the education and health, etc., is still relatively low. We may not be able to reallocate that resources to physical capital, but still there are possibilities of doing that. The saving rate, you know, the saving rate in India has always been high, especially the domestic saving rate, and also even in the household saving rate has been relatively high, because of various reasons. So although it has minor variation there and here, it has been 37% in 2008. It has become slightly less. Now it has recent years, again, it has gone up a little bit because this is up to 2019. So you would see that saving rate in India is, compared to many other countries of the world, it is relatively high, not as good as China, because China has something around 35 to 40%, but otherwise India's saving rate has always been high. So that way, you would say that household saving in India is relatively high, but whether it is because of the demographic changes, whether it is because of our cultural practices, because India's saving rate, people say because high, because parents save because of various other reasons, because of, can be because of marriage, because of other characteristics of the behaviors of the people, maybe because we are saving, not because of the demographic changes. So that we may have to see. So what's happening with the female labor force participation? You might know that that is one of the major drawback of the country. Although with so much of demographic changes, even the female labor force participation has not expanded that much. It has increased, but it is relatively still very, very low. Because if you really look at in the urban areas, it is only something around 15 to 20% now. Recently, there has been some increase. But if you really look at the data over the last 1 decade or so, or more than a decade, it has come down drastically in between, because all the NSSO data and PLFS data right now, which is telling in 2017, it is further came down. But the latest PLFS data shows a tendency towards an increase. But it is increase means, you know, the level is too low, and we cannot really consider anything substantial is happening in female labor force participation. That way, we would say that although demographic dividend expect that female labor force participation should go up drastically, But that has not really happened in the case of India. So that is perhaps one of the drawback. And this drawback is considered as one of the major reasons for India not achieving the demographic dividend. So many people, if you really look at the literature or many writings, people say India's demographic dividend may be a demographic garbage, maybe a demographic waste, and all those kinds of words have been used in demographic dividend. So what do you conclude on all these things on demographic dividend? So we can say that, definitely India has a demographic dividend. As I told you, the accounting factors will exist when some of the factors in the behavioral factors exist, but not perhaps all the full potential. As I told you, the female labor force participation, which is expected to grow very fast, is relatively low. So we may not be able to achieve the full potential, but that doesn't mean that India is not able to achieve a demographic dividend. So in a way, it really tells you there is certain elements of positivity in terms of economic benefits because of the demographic changes, although our achievement is not the full potential compared to many other countries like East Asia or the Western countries, but definitely there is a potential which exists in this country, which will ultimately lead to a faster economic growth as well as in this country. So because not much time left now, because I should also not take much of a time. So maybe I will come to the other implications, because I thought, this is very, very important to really understand at least some of the other implications, not all, because older aging issue itself is a major changes which is going to happen in the society, but I will not touch upon that aspect. But let me just tell you a few major changes which is going to happen, especially at the individual and household and family level. That's perhaps is very, very important, really understand what are the implications of this demographic change. Some people say, because always we speak about demographic dividend, some people say actually the implications of demographic changes is less important for economy, but more important in other aspects, whether it is social, whether it is behavioral and other aspects. But seldom we don't really understand it very deeply, because we always has very limited way of looking at demographic changes. We always say that, okay, demographic changes is very positive for some section. Who is a positive section? We say for children, because children are getting benefited, because when the birth rate comes down within the family, when the children are less, you would always see that the children are get better educated, they becomes better skilled and all those things, which is invariably happens because aspiration of the parents substantially goes up when the number of children comes down. So they somehow wants to educate them and also make them a better employed. So, but we also simply say, because for older people it is bad, because there will be no one to look after them, they'll be left behind, they will be left alone. These are all very simplistic way of looking at what is implications of demographic changes in the larger society. But things are much more different or much more complex than the simplistic analysis of better for children, bad for older. So that is not really which is happening. So we have also some theoretical exposition for it, which is called the second demographic transition theory. We know you have already studied the demographic transition theory perhaps, but there is some modification to it, which is called second demographic transition theory, which also tells you some notions of really what kind of changes which is going to happen. So why it is important? I think because of 2 or 3 of maybe 4 reasons. Because, what we really see because of the demographic changes, there really a change in the shift in the family. The major changes of the demography is we have observing within the family structure. So earlier, if you really look at economic analysis, many of your economic analysis has been based on the household. You always say household per capita income. You always say household per capita expenditure. Everything has been based on a household. But this household become less and less relevant when actually demographic changes happen, because household and family, which was supposed to be this almost uniform or same in the past, will become separate. Because you really see family is substantially different from a household. Because in the household, you may have only parents are living, your father and mother, because both your children may be studying somewhere abroad or studying somewhere else. So your family has only two now because the other children part of the family, but they are not living in the household. But we consider, because most of the expenditure of the household will be for that children who are living abroad or outside. They are studying somewhere. But when we compute your per capita expenditure, you don't include these two people who are really studying, but expenditure is included. So many of the conventional analysis which we are doing through a household, considering that household and family are same, may not be relevant in the future. And also, if you really look at demographic transition, because as I told you, with a very simplistic representation may no longer be good, because good for children, bad for older people. That is really not the way the changes will impact the economy of society. And you would also see that there is very drastic changes is happening, whether it is in fertility, whether it is in mortality, whether it is in migration, because of demographic changes. And the question is also why this family is changing. That is, we can critically answer that question by telling that it is because of a major demographic shift. And major demographic shifts also changes the attitude of the people and the aspirations of the people because of all these things, because there is larger changes is going to happen. So I will give you a few examples and then stop my lecture. The example is classic. If you look at the household size, if you really look at, it's an inverted U-shaped curve. It means that in the past, you have a lower household size. Typically means it was the mortality was higher in the past. You know that in India, always in the 1911, 21, 31, 41, etc., very high mortality situation. So naturally, your family size was low, typically because of low mortality. So very high mortality. Then mortality transition happened, your family size gone up. But again, it has come down in 91, 2000, etc., because you are shifted from a joint family to the what is that, nuclear family. But now what happens is that your family size is low, your household size is low, but now you have a separation between household and a family. That is what I'm coming to, because the migration became a hallmark of any families now. Not only in Kerala, it is happening in every state which is undergoing a fertility or demographic transition. Because demographic transition typically increases the aspiration of the parents for the children. Why it increases? I will show you this graph and then move to why that happens. If you really look at this table, you will understand it. Because if you look at 92, don't look at all these colors. There are varied colors there. Just forget about it. Look at only these two orange color, which I have given this 10.6% in 92, 93 to 18%. If you really look at the percentage of households living only adult male and female, that means that your father, and mother are living. Now it is something around 18.8%. That almost 20% of the households, only father and mother are there. Children are not there. And if you really look at children, it was 18% and now it has become 9%. So I'm saying the family is completely changing because of the demographic changes. Why it happens? There is a second demographic transition theory, they postulate it. They said that, you can really divide the period into three broad categories. One is, that when, say, that child neutral era, which we say when you have a large number of children, that your parents or your grandparents, when there is a large number of children, your child, some of them got educated, some of them never got educated. It became a neutral because parents was taking care of their child, but they are able to help them as much as possible. That not that much money was not there with them, so they educated some of them and they got others were neutral for that. But what is happening in the demographic change period, it has been theorized that there is something called a child king era. It means that the child became almost the center of the society, center of the family, because the parents' attention, the society's attention, the family's attention, everyone's attention is on child. You know that, if you look at, if your parents now meet each other, two of your parents, what will they be speaking? They will only be speaking about their children. What are your child is doing? What is your child is doing? And what are they doing? Even society, what is there in society? If one child is going somewhere and buy something, next day the parents will know that my child is going this place. Why it is? Because the society's attention, everyone's attention is on child. Because child is given so much of importance in that is sort of a second period. People say it has not only happened in India, but it happened in many countries of the world. So this is the second period which India is experiencing now, or Kerala is experiencing now. So we have a child or the children becomes the center of the society, education becomes paramount. Parents are ready to spend any amount for education purpose of the children because they understand that education is the best way to have economic improvement, economic emancipation. That is what the argument is that. But later we found that in many countries of the world, but the Western countries, not in India, there is something called a child stifling era, they say, because child is no more important. You are actually, the attitude changes, your family changes, you postpone your marriage, you postpone your first birth, you don't have birth or not birth, or even divorce rate increases. There is a very rapid changes happens in society because of the demographic changes. Because this must be not expected. As I told you, the major changes was that everyone expected that the fertility rate, which is 2, which is a replacement level, which stay around 2. But many countries of the world, the fertility rate drastically go down even to 1.5, 1.2, even 0.9, which is unprecedentedly low. You cannot have a sustaining a society with such a very, very low fertility rate. So individualistic era is actually questioning even the sustainability of the society in itself. So that is what is called second demographic transition theory is predicted. There is a possibility that you will move from a household change to family change and to an individual change, because many families are only individuals now there. Not even family doesn't exist. One of the famous book, it was written in 1990s in the US, was that new families is no family, because new family is not even, cannot be called a family in itself. It's a no family situation. So this is sort of a drastic changes which can also happen because of demographic changes. So you need to be aware, because as I told you, there are different characteristics of it. I'm not going into the details of it. Major changes was in the marriage pattern, and there are several other changes which was accompanied by these kinds of demographic changes. What is its societal implication? If I just conclude the societal implication, you can say family changes sort of an inevitable, although it can be delayed, even in India. So we know that it is really, if you really look at the situations in Kerala or many other places, which we really know that there are most of the families, the children are away, they are migrating, and they are in another parts of the world or another parts of the country. And it is very happening in almost, so there are substantial compositional changes is happening within the family. The household and family is become separated. Any analysis based on household become unimportant now compared to family. And lot of behavioral changes are happening. There is also relationship changes. We don't know, substantial changes are happening in the relationship, although you are living very far away, but you can maintain that relationship. But in Western countries, we saw even substantial changes even in the relationship aspects. The demographic changes definitely increasing the aspiration, education changes, migration, which are really happening in all parts of the country, whether it is in Kerala, whether it is in other parts of the country. Everywhere uniformly we see a uniform pattern in it. Kerala was sort of a started early, but in other parts of the country, it is little laggards, but it will all happen ultimately. So it means that ultimately changes are going to happen, but one has to be prepared for it. One has to say that how do you really address these changes to make this society sustainable? The society is this happy in terms of the living standards as well as your well-being. That is very, very important. So let me first conclude, because it is almost an hour, which I have been going on speaking. So I think I need to stop and maybe perhaps ask for some questions or discussion. So the cuts of what I have been talking today maybe can be summarized into 2 or 3 aspects. One is that there is a demographic changes is happening. There are variations in it between across states, like Kerala has been the first, you can say 1988, the replacement level fertility. There are other states which is laggards, but changes are happening everywhere. India is also going to change. The demographic changes is going to happen everywhere, invariably, and almost all these changes we expect in one parts of the country will also happen in other parts of the country. And we know that there is considerable variation, and the reasons for demographic changes in this country is different. Because it is different, you have an economic implications may not be completely positive, but there is a potential it will give you some benefits. But in addition to the economic benefit, there are substantial social behavioral changes happening in the society. We are not noticing it because we just live in the society. We thought, it is part of the life. But unless you notice it, you really theorize it, you understand it, you analyze it, perhaps you might miss what is really happening within the household, within the family, and what is really changes in happening, which all has considerable implications for the economy and society. So let me stop here and perhaps would take some of your questions, or would like to engage in any discussion. I'll be happy to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And so we are already running out of time. So we will have a few quick questions from the participant side. You can ask now.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening, good evening. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Introduce yourself and talk.
Sir, I'm Shamima Tasneem from BA from UG. So, sir, you earlier mentioned the aging population is rapidly growing, and according to different studies, it has some people say it has bad effects, and you also mentioned it may not be that bad. I'd like to know if that has any positive implication for the societies.
Yeah, it's all ultimately a question of how do you define aging. You always have a tendency to define aging based on a chronological age. You say that 60 is the cutoff. Where does the 60 come from? We really don't know. It's an arbitrary cutoff you are keeping. If you say 65, then you have different types of aging. If you say 70, then you have another type of aging. So this is really the problem. People say that this arbitrary cutoff we created is a humanly created cutoff. It is not a scientifically created cutoff. No, doctors have told that at age 60 only you are aging, or at age 65 or you are aging. Medical science, they have never told it. It's actually demographers or social scientists has made a cutoff. So that is why I think there are also people are trying to question the definition in itself. If you really change your definition, that is what one of the definition people say that, okay, your life expectancy is how many years you are living to survive. Maximum people say, okay, 15 years of your life, you may have to live in an older age situation. So it means that, even if you are at 70, you may have another 15 years left for, if you're in a high life expectancy states like in Kerala. So you can really define your aging as 70 there. That's the definition question. Secondly, the question is whether it is aging is bad or good. The experience of many countries, because there is a major study which is happening. I don't know whether you are aware of it. There's something called a national transfer account. The national transfer account study is happening in many countries of the world, which is really transferring your national income, because whether you can age allocate your national income. If you age allocate, you can really say that what proportion of national income is coming from the older people, what proportion of national income is coming from the adult people, and younger people anyway not produce, only they are consumers. So this study, interestingly in India, it showed that actually the large proportion of income is created by the older people. In many countries of the world, it is not correct, because there are very strict retirement age in many countries, because then, your income creation is not that high. But in India, there is no retirement age except for the organized workers, which is only less than 10%. So 90% of the people keep on working in India. So naturally, you don't have any retirement age. You keep on working, whether you are 60 or 65 or 70, you don't bother. Your parents or your grandparents, that they have been working on agriculture or whatever the occupation they were doing. So naturally, the second demographic dividend tells that there are possibilities of really expanding your workforce economic participation beyond age 60 or 65. That's how the dividend tells that there is a dividend which occurs even at the older ages. But, you have to productively engage them. The question is that in Kerala, like state where unemployment is still serious, whether you will be able to productively employ the older people, that is a question, because that is anyway is another problems which we have to encounter in a state like Kerala. Otherwise, it is possible. Yeah.
Sir, I am Shigdi M. Thomas, faculty, Department of Economics, St. Joseph's College, Devagiri. I really appreciate your lecture because you have presented a balanced view of the demographic changes in India and Kerala. My opinion is that the growth of population is anyway detrimental to the development. Because here in India, the thing is that the distribution of income, it is due to lack of distribution of income. We have all this type of development, all this type of poverty and other issues. Therefore, I consider because children is our future wealth. We have to train the children. Nowadays, we can see some sort of new theories that indicates new growth theories or endogenous growth theories that indicates the training and restructuring of the resources, human resources. So I think the higher growth rate of population is not a detrimental factor for economic growth. In your speech, you have mentioned new insights like the new theory of demographic transition. It is entirely new to me. I will thank for that. I am thanking for that. Then again, this is one of my observations because India is one of the tropical country. We have high fertility rate. Is there any reason for that? Because when you speak of the Western countries, they are away from equator. They are not at tropical regions, and their growth rate is very low. Even we can see in Russia, we can see Russia or some other countries, East European countries, we can see they are giving awards to the mother who is giving more children. So that is the case. Is there any relation between the climate conditions and the changes in population, the higher population growth rate there? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think you have asked two questions. One is on the implications of demographic change of population, how it affects the economy. No, whether it is in the growth theory models or even the classic Cole and Hoover theory, which we study about the population growth and economic development, which was done in 1950s. All of them tell one thing. It is actually too much of high dependency ratio is not good for any economy. So rapid population growth means that the dependent population is rapidly increasing, may not be good for any economy. So a moderate growth is always fine, but not a very rapid increase in the age group less than 15 or 60 plus. So both the sides, that is correct. So that way, age structure changes are always good, but in a moderate way. In a very rapid age structure changes also can affect in various ways. That's what I mentioned. It is not only in economy, but there are different other ways of looking at it. So that way, I would say that population growth is fine, but it's a moderate growth, not a very rapid growth. But it should be a negative population growth is also may not be not advisable. But although it happens in some countries, they are trying to reverse it. And they are reversing it. Many people have incentives and disincentive policies. Incentive is what many countries tries, and disincentives. That India, etc., was trying to have many disincentives for it. They wanted to punish people who have more than 2 children. They will not be given political benefits, and all those things has been tried, but none of them really has benefited. What is really found in demographic changes is that demographic changes once happens, it is irreversible. That is what you have to really seriously understand. In many countries, even China, now they are trying to reverse it. It has been told that, it is almost impossible to reverse it. Because if your generations and generations have only one child, if you say that you need to have 2 child or 3 child, it is very impossible to reverse it. Countries are trying to reverse it through incentives, but, their success rate is very, very minimal, you can say. It has become, you can really increase it from 1.2 to 1.4, 1.5, etc., but not anything substantial increase. So what does it mean? Once the demographic changes happens, you have to live with it. It means that you will never see in our vicinity, in our park, or in our places we go, a large number of children, what we have seen in our childhood or in our parents' have seen. You'll only see a large proportion of older people sitting all over India, whether it is in Kerala, whether it's in India, or in wherever it's in the whole world that is going to happen. Reversing it is sort of a very impossibility. can happen a little bit there and here, but not a major changes. And second question was whether it is a climate, its impact on. We really don't have any scientific evidence on it, because this is actually all these changes, it's a conscious decision of the parents or couples. Because demographic changes is not something automatic which has happened. It has really the conscious decision taken by the couples, or it is by the parents. So naturally, it is, whether it is Western countries, whether it is developing countries, whether it is in Africa now, these are all, at the end of the day, it is a conscious decision now. Unless in China, like, you have been forced to do something. You might be conscious decision, but, you have no choice, but you have to do it. That's a different thing. Other than that, it is a conscious decision. Naturally, we cannot attribute to any other factors other than the real, what is really happened at the back of it, the socioeconomic changes or the modernization aspects or the aspirations, and so on and so forth.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm Meenu, and I'm a third year BA economics student. So as per a study, following states like Bihar and Bengal, Kerala is in third in number intensity of population with 860 number per square kilometer. And what will be our action plan or policy to distribute the necessary items like food, infrastructure, employment, etc.? And what will be the impact in economy due to the high density of population of such states?
Actually, high density does not really affect the economic prosperity. There is no evidence to suggest that. I'm saying high density is supposed to be good for economic prosperity, because high density, you are easy to provide the infrastructure facilities, and also transportation and all the other things are much easier. So that way, but the Kerala's high densities should be viewed slightly different from the other parts of the country, because high density in Kerala also means that it's a sparsely distributed high density, not really high density in Mumbai, where I live. It's different from a high density in Kerala. So the sparsely distributed high density, because of that, there are also challenges sometimes in providing services, in providing infrastructure, in providing, because you have to take your roads to each corners where people are living, compared to in a city where you have high density, but you live together, you are in apartments, everything is much easier to provide services. So, but even I don't think that there is any evidence to suggest that high density has any direct bearing on the economic bearing in any parts of the world. So that way, I don't think we need to really consider seriously a high density as a detrimental or a very positive factor, perhaps positive in terms of in certain aspects, but not anything significantly negative as far as the economic growth is concerned.
Thank you, sir.
So we have a few questions in the chat sessions. So we have two questions.
Yeah, two questions. Yeah, one is this household income and family income. Yeah, that's what I was telling. You look at the simple examples. A household now, a father is working in Dubai and sending all the income to the family. But when you are counting for that household, there are only two people there, a mother and a child. The earning member of the household is there, but he is not included in your denominator within a per capita household. The per capita household income, the income is coming from some other person who is not counted in the household. Because, once you come a survey or when your census is taken, he is not counted. He is in abroad. That is how, survey and census are conducted. So the main earning member is not counted in a per capita income of the household, but he is the income earner. But two unearning member is counted as a per capita. It's a the income divided by 2, while the third member who is the earning is also case with expenditure. That is what I was telling. If you consider per capita expenditure, you are spending primarily for your children. So naturally, your children are in Australia or Canada, but your parents are here. Both of them are earning, but you are considering expenditure only for these two, and then you are telling that, okay, the per capita expenditure of this household is too high and they are very wealthy, you will conclude. Because, per capita expenditure is also one of the indicators you consider to measure wealthy population. So expenditure is too high because they are spending so much of money for their children studying in Canada and Australia with two parents. Only parents are being in the denominator. So you will, these kinds of discrepancies are going to happen in the future because of this tussle between a household and family. So we need to increasingly move from a household analysis to family analysis. Otherwise, you may not capture many of the economic changes, and you may classify the household simply in a different categories, although it is not a really good classification. And what was the other question? Vilash, how far can the state go without rationalizing the person's expenses as number of pensioners increase in the state resources and do not develop? Yeah, this is a question on the public finance issue. What is the state finance? I am really not a competent person to answer that questions because I don't really work on public finance. Yeah, this is a serious issue which is faced in all over the world because of this transition, primarily because of the transition of the proportion of persons in the older ages increases. Naturally, there's a strain in the resources for many countries because you need to spend a lot of your money for the social welfare schemes. If your pension is only some part of the social welfare, because pension, as I told you, will get only 10% of the population. But in Western countries, it is universal pension, like universal social welfare scheme. So many of them were facing these constraints because of the mounting expenditure on healthcare, because the older people mounting expenditure on the pension. But we also see a lot of changes which is happening. We also, because initially it was expected that when your life expectancy increases, you would also increasing your period in which you are living in disability or morbid situation. That's what, you can really expand your life expectancy, but, most of your life expectancy, you will not be living in a healthy life. But later, which is found that many countries of the world, especially Western countries, they were also able to reduce the morbidity or your ill health life substantially because of several interventions, because of lifestyle improvement, because of smoking, alcohol consumption, everything is substantially reduced. That is one part. Second is your diagnostic intervention, because your heart disease and all those things has been postponed to later years of your life. The cancer because of diagnostic. So all these diseases which are onsetting at early ages, which has been postponed substantially in many countries. So earlier it was in 40s and 50s, now it is 60s and 70s, they postponed. So the life expectancy is increasing and healthy life expectancy is also increasing. So that way, there are a lot of possibilities even with an increase in so you don't need to look at only in the pension ways, but you can also look at varied other ways on what are the changes happening.
Thank you, sir. So with this, we come to an end of the session. Thank you for all the responses that you have
Is there
given
any
to every
scope
question.
of
And
taking other questions?
first of all, I would like to thank Professor K.S. James for accepting our invitation and providing a well-endowed session on the demographic trends in India. Sir has emphasized on the major changes in demography at the replacement level, fertility, demographic transition, fertility transition, demographic dividend and its factors, and also on major trends and implications of demographic change in India. So on behalf of the Department of Economics, the Interest of Autonomous College, Devagiri, I extend my deep sense of gratitude to Professor K.S. James. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And also, we expect more associations with your institutes in future. Also, I would like to thank all the participants of the sessions. Hope you all have got updated with relevant information on the demographic trends. Thank you all. Thanks to all who have asked questions in the sessions. Also, I thank Dr. Father Biju Joseph, who arranged and coordinated the entire session. Thank you, Father. Thank you, Shibi sir, our HOD, for all the support that you have extended. And we will have more sessions in the upcoming future. Hope all of you will make use of these sessions. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
sir.
It has been a pleasure to talking to you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Good evening, Father.
Hello, good evening, Leda. So, Leda, you comment to us there. Very informative.
Father, it was a very informative session, Father. Thank you so much for this. And the coordinators, Anne Mary also.
Yeah, Mary is the coordinator. She conducted all the, so it took pain to conduct all these activities and director sir and arranged everything.
Okay, Father.
So
I was
appreciation goes to Anne Mary.
Okay. Congrats, Anne.
And we have arranged some more sessions also. That means by Derajan and others will be handling the coming sessions. And you also welcome for that one.
Okay, thank you, Father. I'll be sure I will be there, Father.
So special appreciation to Anne Mary. Thank you.
Teacher, it was not clear or what?
It's not clear?
Was it clear the end?
Yeah, it's clear, but your sound was it was feeble. That's
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, initially it was okay, but in the end.
Next time we'll fix it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Father. Thank you.